One morning under the scorching, unrelenting sun of Lagos, a young girl stood at the grand glass entrance of a colossal, bustling shopping mall. Her name was Lucy, and if you glanced at her for just a fraction of a second, you would see nothing more than a simple, ordinary mall attendant. She wore a bright orange uniform that had been washed so many times the fabric was beginning to fray at the edges, and pinned to her chest was a small, plastic name tag that read, Lucy, attendant. The air around her was thick with the heavy exhaust of roaring city traffic, the loud, aggressive shouting of street vendors, and the chaotic hum of thousands of people rushing past, eager to escape the suffocating heat. Amidst this overwhelming sea of chaos, Lucy did something truly remarkable. She smiled. It was a genuine, radiant smile that seemed to catch the morning light, a smile that she offered freely to every single stranger who pushed past her through those heavy revolving doors. It was only her third week on the job, yet she moved with a quiet grace, stepping from one towering aisle to another, meticulously arranging heavy boxes on the shelves, sweeping the glossy tiled floors until they reflected the fluorescent lights above, and patiently guiding frustrated shoppers to exactly what they were looking for. To the wealthy elite who frequented this high-end establishment, Lucy was practically invisible, just a moving part of the building's architecture, a nameless face hired to clear away their discarded items. No one who looked at her beaming face or heard her melodic, polite voice could ever guess the crushing, suffocating weight of pain she carried deep within her chest. They didn't know that behind that flawless, welcoming smile was a tragic story of survival, a deep, silent ache that never truly went away. Lucy was completely and utterly alone in this massive, unforgiving world. Exactly 1 year prior, her entire universe had been violently ripped away from her when both of her doting parents were killed instantly in a horrific roadside accident on the outskirts of the city. In a single devastating moment, she went from being a cherished daughter with a bright future to an orphan with absolutely nobody to turn to. She had no brothers to protect her, no sisters to share her tears, and no wealthy relatives willing to open their doors or their wallets to a girl who now had nothing to offer. All she had left to her name was a tiny, dilapidated single room she rented in one of the poorest, most dangerous slums of Lagos. It was a miserable place where one corner of the corrugated iron roof leaked heavily whenever the tropical storms rolled in, forcing her to huddle in the opposite corner to stay dry. The single wooden window was warped from years of neglect and could never close properly, letting in the damp night air. And worse, the moment she turned off her flickering light bulb, she could hear the terrifying sound of large rats scratching and scratching in the dark ceiling above her head. Yet, despite the hunger that frequently gnawed at her stomach, and despite the sheer exhaustion that threatened to break her body, Lucy woke up every single morning before the sun even dared to rise. She would carefully clean herself with a small bucket of cold water, iron her worn orange uniform with a heavy old-fashioned iron, and walk the long distance to the shopping mall, stepping onto the floor looking as though she didn't have a single care in the world. When the afternoon clock finally struck her designated lunch break, Lucy did not join the other workers who gathered in the canteen to gossip and complain about their low wages. Instead, she walked quietly out the back exit and sat completely alone on a narrow, rusted metal bench hidden in the shadow of the massive concrete building. Her small, trembling hands tightly gripped a cold plastic bottle of water, but she didn't open it to drink. She just sat there in absolute silence, her head bowed, staring blankly at the oil-stained concrete floor beneath her worn-out sneakers. Out here, the deafening noise of the busy Lagos streets felt distant, muffled by the heavy walls of the mall, and for a few brief moments, everything around her felt completely, terrifyingly quiet. In this heavy silence, her treacherous mind betrayed her, drifting backward in time, thinking about the life she once possessed, the life that had been so cruelly stolen from her. Just 12 short months ago, Lucy wasn't wearing a cheap orange uniform. She was a brilliant, ambitious student in her second year at a prestigious university. She had been studying day and night with a burning passion, because her ultimate dream was to become a medical doctor. She didn't want the title for fame or riches. She simply loved helping people, and the vision of herself wearing a crisp white lab coat, healing the sick and comforting the broken, was the fuel that kept her going through every sleepless night. That beautiful dream had given her immense hope, making her believe that she could lift her family out of poverty. But the very moment the news of her parents' tragic deaths reached the university campus, That dream shattered into a million jagged pieces. Without her father's meager income, there was absolutely no one to pay her skyrocketing school fees, no money to buy the expensive medical textbooks she required, and no money to even afford a basic meal. With a breaking heart and tears pouring down her face, she had been forced to drop out of the university. Lucy blinked rapidly, forcing herself out of the memory, and looked up at the vast, cloudless blue sky, her vision blurring as fresh tears threatened to spill over. "I tried," she whispered into the empty air, her voice cracking and shaking with an overwhelming grief that she rarely allowed herself to feel. "I really tried so hard." She could still vividly remember the agonizing day she had to pack her entire life into one single small nylon bag to leave the university dormitory forever. Her roommate had held her and wept loudly, and her favorite lecturer had called her into his office, gently patting her shoulder and begging her to stay strong. But they all knew there was absolutely nothing they could do to alter her grim reality. Since that dark day, Lucy had thrown away her pride and thrown herself into a brutal cycle of survival, taking on any grueling, low-paying job she could find. First, she spent months standing under the blazing sun, selling cheap fruits by the dusty roadside, inhaling toxic exhaust fumes for pennies. When that failed to pay her rent, she spent her days washing mountains of heavy clothes by hand for wealthy families who treated her like dirt. And now, she had landed this job as a mall attendant, a position that paid barely enough to keep her from starving. Suddenly, the sharp metallic ticking of her cheap wristwatch caught her attention, and she realized her short break was officially over. Lucy stood up slowly from the rusted bench, took a deep breath to steady her shaking frame, wiped the moisture from her eyes with the back of her hand, and forced that beautiful, deceptive smile right back onto her face. Deep inside her chest, her heart remained incredibly heavy, aching with an intense longing to hold a pen instead of a broom, to sit in a lecture hall instead of a storage room. She wanted a better life so desperately. She wanted more than this endless cycle of misery, and yet she said absolutely nothing to anyone because she knew that in this massive, ruthless city, every person was fighting their own desperate battle, and no one had the time or the luxury to listen to the sorrows of a poor orphan girl. She squared her shoulders, adjusted her name tag, and walked back through the heavy rear doors into the air-conditioned mall, her smile shining once again like the brilliant morning sun, masking the deep, quiet torment that lived within her soul. Meanwhile, on the highest floor of an ultra-modern skyscraper located in the most exclusive commercial district of Lagos, an entirely different world existed. Mr. Felix Badmus sat quietly in a massive, high-backed executive chair made of premium Italian leather. This was the exact same chair that his legendary late father, Mr. Anthony Badmus, had occupied with immense pride for over 30 long years. The vast CEO office was incredibly quiet, insulated from the chaotic city below by thick, soundproof glass windows that stretched from the polished hardwood floor to the high ceiling, allowing a soft, temperature-controlled breeze from the advanced ventilation system to circulate through the room. At a very young age, Felix had suddenly found himself thrust into the position of Chief Executive Officer of Badmus and Company, one of the largest and most powerful conglomerates in the entire country. It wasn't a position he had aggressively campaigned for or even planned to take so soon. It was a heavy mantle that fell squarely upon his shoulders immediately after his father's sudden and unexpected passing. Felix was remarkably young, staggeringly wealthy, and incredibly sharp, possessing a brilliant business mind that had earned him the respect of older executives across the continent. Yet, despite his immense billionaire status, Felix carried himself with a rare, profound humility because his father had drilled one crucial golden rule into his mind from the moment he was old enough to understand the concept of wealth. His father had always leaned in close and whispered, "Felix, my son, never draw too much unnecessary attention to your riches. Keep your daily life simple and your head low. When the public doesn't know too much about your personal movements, your wealth, or your vulnerabilities, you and the people you love are infinitely safer." Felix had internalized those words completely, allowing them to shape his entire identity. Even now, controlling a financial empire that dictated market trends, he absolutely refused to live a loud, flashy lifestyle. Unlike the other wealthy young men of Lagos, who drove roaring sports cars, wore diamond-encrusted watches, and flaunted their millions on social media, Felix moved through the world like a ghost. No one outside the inner circle of the company's board of directors really knew what the reclusive billionaire CEO actually looked like. He deliberately dressed in simple, unbranded linen shirts, drove a modest tinted sedan, and frequented quiet, ordinary establishments, where he could blend into the crowd without a single person noticing him. To the unsuspecting general public, he appeared to be just another regular, hard-working corporate employee trying to make a living. But beneath that calm, unassuming exterior, he carried a massive family name, an astronomical net worth, and an even heavier responsibility to protect the legacy his father had spent a lifetime building. Living in a secluded, heavily guarded mansion far away from the city's noise was Mrs. Agnes Badmus, the mother of Felix and the true matriarch of the Badmus family. She was a deeply calm, exceptionally wise woman in her late 60s, whose face bore the soft lines of a life fully lived, a life that had stayed remarkably strong through countless turbulent storms. The greatest and most devastating storm she had ever faced was the untimely death of her beloved husband, Anthony, a loss that had threatened to shatter her entire world. Since that painful day, she had dedicated her life to supporting her only son, Felix, living quietly alongside him in their sprawling, elegant estate. On this particular evening, the mansion was bathed in a peaceful golden light as Mrs. Agnes sat gracefully on a long cream-colored velvet sofa in the main living room, gently holding a crystal glass filled with fresh fruit juice. The atmosphere in the house was exceptionally serene, the only sound being the distant chirping of birds in the manicured gardens outside. The heavy wooden double doors of the living room opened softly, and Felix walked in, his tie loosened around his neck, a gentle, weary smile gracing his handsome face the moment his eyes landed on his mother. "Good evening, Mom," he said softly, walking over to press a warm, respectful kiss against her forehead. Mrs. Agnes looked up at her son, a mixture of immense pride and deep worry swirling in her wise eyes, and she shook her head with a slow, deliberate sigh. "Felix, sit down beside me," she said, her voice carrying a gentle authority that could not be denied. "We need to have a serious talk." Felix chuckled softly and sat down on the plush cushion right next to her, already knowing exactly what topic was about to be brought up, as it was a conversation they had avoided for months. She turned her entire body to face him, staring directly into his eyes, her expression turning incredibly serious. "You are always working, Felix. From the moment the sun rises until late into the night, you are entirely consumed by meetings, financial reports, and endless business deals. But what about your personal life, my son? When will you finally slow down and bring home a woman? A good, genuine girl that I can embrace with open arms and call my own daughter?" Felix's smile turned slightly melancholic as he looked down at his hands. "Mom, I am trying, I really am," he replied, his voice dropping to a quiet whisper. "But you must understand that in my position, it is not easy to find someone who is real. Most of the women I meet are only interested in the Badmas name, the status, and the security of my bank account." Mrs. Agnes placed her crystal cup firmly on the wooden coffee table, reaching out to wrap her warm, soft hands around his. "You are not a young boy anymore, Felix. I am aging, and my only desire before I leave this earth is to see you truly happy, to see this massive house filled with the laughter of my grandchildren. I want you to have a real partner." "I know, Mom," Felix said quietly, his eyes reflecting a deep sincerity, "and I promise you that I am doing my absolute best. I just need a little more time to find someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I own." She nodded her head slowly, accepting his answer for now, but she squeezed his hands tightly, her voice turning incredibly soft yet powerful. "Just make sure she is kind, Felix. That is the only thing I ask of you. Riches can disappear in a flash, beauty fades with time, but a truly kind heart is an eternal treasure." Felix smiled and reassured her, but deep within the hidden recesses of his heart, a heavy worry lingered. How could a billionaire, who hid his true identity, ever find a woman whose love was completely pure, completely uncorrupted by greed? It seemed like an impossible mission in a world driven by material wealth. The following day, a suffocating, blistering heat settled over the city of Lagos, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. Inside the grand, newly opened shopping mall where Lucy worked, the environment was chaotic and incredibly busy, filled with the loud chatter of hundreds of affluent shoppers moving in and out of the high-end stores, carrying expensive designer bags and laughing carelessly. Amidst this bustling, chaotic crowd, an elderly woman walked into the main entrance of the supermarket section, completely unnoticed. It was Mrs. Agnes Badmus. True to her family's philosophy of humility, she had left her luxury vehicles and armed bodyguards behind, choosing to dress in a remarkably plain, faded cotton dress that had seen better days, and a pair of simple, cheap rubber slippers that made a soft, clicking sound against the polished marble floor as she walked. She looked incredibly tired, her breathing slightly labored from the intense heat, but she moved with a sense of urgency, walking straight down the grocery aisle until she located the shelf containing cooking oil. She reached up with a slightly trembling hand, picked up one single, small, inexpensive bottle of cooking oil, and walked toward the long paying counters, hoping to make a quick purchase. When she finally reached the front of the line, she offered a gentle, polite smile to the young cashier behind the counter. "I am in a profound hurry, please, my daughter, Mrs." Agnes said softly, her voice filled with a motherly warmth. "I just need to pay for this quickly so I can get home before the dark rain clouds outside begin to burst." The cashier, a heavily made-up young lady with a sour expression on her face, was loudly and aggressively chewing a massive piece of pink gum, making obnoxious popping sounds. She didn't even bother to look Mrs. Agnes in the eye. Instead, she lazily scanned the bottle of oil, threw it carelessly onto the counter, and snapped in a rude, impatient tone, "Madam, your money? Hurry up, people are waiting behind you." Mrs. Agnes paused, a look of confusion crossing her face, as she instinctively reached into the deep pockets of her plain dress. Suddenly, her expression completely changed, to one of absolute shock and realization. "Oh no," she murmured slowly, her voice filled with sudden embarrassment. "I was in such a rush that I completely forgot to bring my purse. It must be sitting right on the kitchen table at home." She looked up at the cashier with pleading eyes. "I am so incredibly sorry, my daughter. Please hold the bottle for me, let me rush right back outside, call a taxi, and bring the money to pay you." The cashier's eyes narrowed into a fierce, ugly scowl, and she let out a loud, dramatic scoff that echoed across the front of the store. "Ah! Ah! Look at this old woman. So you actually came all the way to this expensive mall just to waste my precious time? You know very well that you don't have a single kobo in your pockets, and yet you have the audacity to stand in front of my counter holding up my line?" The affluent shoppers standing directly behind Mrs. Agnes immediately turned their heads, staring at her with cold, judgmental eyes, whispering sneering remarks about her poor appearance. Mrs. Agnes felt a burning wave of humiliation wash over her face, her hands beginning to shake violently as she tried to explain herself again. "Please, my child, I didn't mean any harm. I am not a liar. I truly just forgot my purse in my hurry, and I desperately needed this specific oil for cooking dinner." The cashier raised her voice to a deafening, piercing screech, deliberately attracting the attention of the entire supermarket. "Who sent you here to disturb me? Do you think this international shopping mall is a charity home or a church welfare center? Look at you. No money, wearing rags, but you came here to shop with the big dogs. Madam, move your poor self away from my counter right now and stop blocking valid customers, Mrs." Agnes's eyes instantly dropped to the ground, tears of absolute shame welling up in her eyes as her entire body trembled under the weight of the cruel public insult. The people surrounding her simply watched, some laughing quietly, but not a single soul stepped forward to help an old woman in distress. Only a few steps away, Lucy had been standing on a stepladder, carefully arranging heavy cans of tomato paste on a high shelf. The moment the cashier's loud, venomous voice pierced through the air, Lucy's heart began to beat rapidly against her ribs with a sudden, overwhelming sense of panic. She quickly climbed down from the ladder and walked briskly toward the front counters, her eyes widening as she witnessed the heartbreaking scene unfolding before her. She saw the fragile, elderly woman standing entirely alone, her head bowed in deep humiliation, her hands shaking as tears threatened to spill onto her faded dress. The cruel cashier was actively rolling her eyes, laughing loudly with another worker, enjoying the old woman's suffering, while the wealthy crowd looked on with utter indifference. Lucy felt a powerful, uncontrollable surge of emotion ignite within her chest, a deep, agonizing sadness mixed with a fierce, righteous anger against the blatant injustice. Without a single thought for her own safety or her job security, Lucy stepped forward, pushing past the glaring customers, and inserted herself directly between the crying woman and the mocking cashier. "What on earth is going on here?" Lucy asked, her voice firm and steady, demanding answers. The cashier rolled her eyes aggressively, letting out a loud hiss. "Lucy, can you imagine this ridiculous old woman? She claims she has no money but wants to buy our premium cooking oil. She is standing here spinning some stupid lie about forgetting her purse at home, wasting my target time." Lucy ignored the cashier's toxic attitude, turning her entire body toward the elderly woman, her gaze softening instantly. "Ma, please look at me. Is this true? She asked, her voice dripping with genuine empathy. Mrs. Agnes looked up slowly, her eyes wide and filled with a deep, painful vulnerability. Yes, my dear, I swear to you I am not lying. I only needed this one bottle for my kitchen, but I truly, honestly forgot my purse. Lucy felt a sharp pang of familiarity in her heart. She knew exactly what it felt like to be looked down upon, to be publicly humiliated just because of an appearance. She turned back to face the hostile cashier, her expression turning into stone as she spoke calmly and decisively. Give her the cooking oil right now. The cashier blinked in absolute disbelief, her jaw dropping. What did you just say? Give her? Yes, Lucy replied, her voice unwavering. Scan the bottle, put it in a bag for her, and deduct the exact amount from my own monthly salary. The cashier's mouth remained wide open as she let out a loud gasp. Are you completely insane, Lucy? You want to use your meager, tiny salary to pay for a total stranger who looks like a beggar? Yes, Lucy said again, her eyes flashing with a fierce determination. It is just one single bottle of oil. Losing that small amount from my pay will not kill me, but letting this mother leave here in tears will break my heart. Do it now, Mrs. Agnes looked up at Lucy, her lips parting in sheer, utter shock, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the young mall attendant who had just sacrificed her own hard-earned money for her. Tears finally spilled over her wrinkled cheeks, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. Thank you, my beautiful child, she whispered, her voice shaking violently with an intense emotion. Thank you so much. Lucy offered her a stunning, incredibly warm smile, took the scanned bottle of oil from the stunned cashier, gently placed it into a clean nylon bag, handing it over with deep respect. It is perfectly okay, Ma. Please don't cry anymore. Just take your oil and get home safely before the rain begins to fall. Lucy was just about to turn her back and return to her designated aisle to continue her grueling work when she heard the elderly woman's soft, melodic voice call out to her from behind. My dear Mrs. Agnes said quietly, her steps halting. Please wait for just a brief moment. Lucy stopped in her tracks, turned around with that same patient smile and walked back over to where the woman was standing. Yes, Ma? Is there anything else you need help with? The wise, elderly woman stared deeply into Lucy's eyes, as if she were looking past her uniform and straight into her very soul. You didn't know me, my child. You have absolutely nothing to gain from me, and you don't have much wealth yourself, yet you sacrificed your own livelihood to save an old woman from public shame. Why did you do it? Lucy let out a soft, humble chuckle, shaking her head gently. Because you were hurting and you desperately needed help, Ma. That is all that matters. My parents always taught me that kindness doesn't care about faces or pockets. Mrs. Agnes nodded her head slowly, a profound, unreadable expression settling over her features, like a person who had just discovered a priceless diamond hidden in a pile of ordinary stones. She reached out, her eyes shining brightly, and asked, What is your name, my beautiful child? My name is Lucy, Ma, she replied politely. Lucy, Mrs. Agnes repeated the name carefully, a brilliant, knowing smile completely transforming her tired face. That is an absolutely lovely name, a name that means light. Lucy smiled warmly, feeling a strange sense of comfort. Thank you so much, Ma. Safe journey home. My name is Agnes, the older woman said softly, her voice carrying a sudden hidden weight that Lucy couldn't quite comprehend. Lucy smiled again. It is truly nice to meet you, Mama Agnes, Mrs. Agnes placed her warm hand gently on Lucy's arm, squeezing it with an immense, unspoken tenderness. God bless your pure soul, Lucy. You possess a uniquely kind heart, the kind that is exceedingly rare in this world. I promise you, I will never, ever forget what you did for me today. She held the small plastic bag containing the cooking oil tight against her chest, turned around, and walked slowly toward the grand glass exit of the mall. But the look on her face was no longer one of exhaustion or shame. Her head was held high, and her eyes were burning with a strange, powerful light. Lucy stood completely still for a few moments, her hands clasped in front of her orange uniform, watching the elderly woman disappear into the crowded street outside. She couldn't shake off a bizarre, lingering feeling in her chest. Something about that woman's presence felt incredibly different, incredibly significant, though she had absolutely no idea that this simple act of pure kindness had just set off a massive, unstoppable chain reaction that would completely shatter her current reality and flip her entire world upside down forever. The tropical rain finally unleashed its fury over the sprawling city of Lagos, hammering heavily against the tinted glass windows of the Grand Badmas mansion. Inside the masterfully designed living room, a thick, uncomfortable tension hung in the air. Mrs. Agnes Badmus sat perfectly still on the velvet sofa, her hands tightly gripping the small nylon bag containing the single bottle of cooking oil. Her face was an unreadable mask of deep contemplation, but her eyes, usually so calm and gentle, flashed with a mixture of residual shock and profound realization. Felix was sitting a few feet away at a massive mahogany desk, his fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard of his laptop as he managed his multi-million-dollar corporate accounts. The moment he heard the front door close and felt the heavy, uncharacteristic silence radiating from his mother, he stopped typing and looked up. He adjusted his glasses, his sharp eyes immediately tracking the subtle tremor in her hands and the slight dampness on her shoulders. "Mom, are you completely okay?" he asked, his deep voice slicing through the quiet room as he pushed his laptop aside. "You look completely different. Your breath is shallow and your mind seems a million miles away. Please tell me, what on earth happened out there?" Mrs. Agnes let out a long, ragged breath that seemed to shake her entire fragile frame, placing the small bottle of oil directly onto her lap. She looked up at her only son, her eyes swelling with a sudden painful emotion. "Felix, I went to the shopping mall," she began, her voice cracking slightly as she recounted the ordeal. "I just wanted to personally pick up a single bottle of oil to cook something special, but in my immense haste, I completely forgot my purse at home. I didn't realize it until I stood face to face with the cashier at the counter." Felix raised his eyebrows, a look of mild amusement transitioning into deep concern. Then his mother looked directly into his eyes, and her voice dropped into a tone of absolute hurt. "The young lady behind that counter humiliated me, Felix. She insulted me in front of a massive crowd of total strangers. She barked at me like I was a worthless beggar, screaming that I came to waste her time and that I didn't belong in such a luxurious establishment. She mocked my clothing, she mocked my age, and she tore my dignity to shreds while everyone watched and laughed." The amused expression on Felix's face vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden, terrifying coldness. His jaw tightened so hard that a sharp muscle ticked in his cheek, and his hands clenched into tight fists flat against the mahogany desk. "What?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave into a dangerous, protective growl. "Which specific mall was this, Mom? Tell me right now." Mrs. Agnes paused, looking at her son's escalating fury, and took a deep breath. "The new flagship mall down the main avenue, Felix. The exact mega mall where you told me your conglomerate just acquired a massive, controlling financial stake last month." A suffocating, dangerous silence filled the luxurious room as the realization hit Felix like a physical blow. His own mother, the matriarch of the vast Badmas empire, had been publicly degraded and treated like a piece of worthless garbage inside a building that he practically owned. The thought made his blood boil, a fierce protective wrath igniting deep within his chest. "How could they dare treat you like that?" he said, his voice shaking with a cold, controlled anger as he stood up from his leather chair. "How could any employee under my corporate umbrella be so wretchedly cruel to an elderly woman?" Mrs. Agnes immediately reached out, her soft hand gently touching his arm, non-verbally pleading for him to control his rising temper. "Calm down, my son. Please sit back down and let me finish the story," because amidst that horrible darkness, a beautiful light walked in. While I was standing there in absolute agony, entirely unable to defend myself, completely trapped in my shame, a young girl in an attendant uniform stepped forward. She didn't look at my old clothes with disgust like the others did. She actively demanded to know why I was being harassed, and the moment she heard my plight, she didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. She turned directly to that nasty cashier and commanded her to release the oil to me. Then, Felix, she did something that left me entirely speechless. She ordered the cashier to deduct the cost of the cooking oil directly from her own tiny, miserable monthly salary. Felix's sharp eyes widened in absolute, utter astonishment, his anger momentarily short-circuiting as his mother's words washed over him. He slowly sank back onto the edge of the sofa, staring at her in disbelief. "She actually did that? A simple mall attendant offered to pay for your item with her own hard-earned wages?" "Yes," Mrs. Agnes said, a radiant, incredibly soft smile breaking through her tears, completely replacing the lingering shadow of her humiliation. "She stood up for me when the entire world turned its back. She was like a literal angel sent from heaven above, so unbelievably simple, so beautifully kind. I was so deeply moved by her sacrifice that I stopped her before she could walk away, and I asked for her name so I would never forget it." Felix leaned forward, his heart suddenly beating with a strange, intense curiosity that he couldn't quite explain. "What is her name, Mom?" Who is this girl? His mother looked at him, her eyes shining with an immense warmth. Lucy, she replied softly, letting the name echo through the quiet mansion. Her name is Lucy. Felix leaned completely back against the cushions, his gaze drifting upward toward the ceiling as his brilliant corporate mind began to race at 1,000,000 miles per hour. The sheer contrast between the vicious, power-tripping cashier and this fiercely protective, selfless girl named Lucy struck a deep chord within him. He stood up from the sofa once again, his hands resting tightly by his side, his face shifting into a stern, unyielding expression of absolute authority. He was no longer just a concerned son. He was the powerful, uncompromising CEO of Badmus and Company. Mom, how can someone be permitted to insult you so vilely in a business establishment that bears my financial backing, he said, his voice ringing with a terrifying strength. The culture of cruelty in that place is entirely unacceptable. Mrs. Agnes reached up, gently patting his arm. Felix, I was deeply hurt in that moment. Yes, but I do not want you to walk into that place carrying nothing but blind, destructive anger. There was something profoundly beautiful that came out of that ugly trial. Lucy didn't have a single clue who I truly was. She didn't see a wealthy woman. She just saw a helpless mother in deep distress, and she risked her own small livelihood to protect me. People possessing that level of pure, uncorrupted kindness are exceptionally rare in this modern world. Felix listened intensely, his heart absorbing every single detail about this mysterious girl. I want to meet her again, Felix, Agnes said softly, her eyes pleading. I want to thank her properly, to bring her into our home, and do something truly meaningful for her life. She has a heart of pure gold, and she deserves to be rewarded. Felix nodded his head slowly, a calculating, resolute look settling deep into his eyes. You will definitely meet her again, Mom. I give you my solemn word on that. He paused, his expression hardening into stone as his thoughts drifted to the antagonist of the story. But as for that wretched cashier who dared to insult and humiliate you, I will absolutely not leave her to go unpunished. I will personally handle her case myself. Agnes looked at him with gentle, cautious eyes. Please, Felix, justice must be served, but do not go too far. I won't break the law, Mom, Felix said, his voice freezing cold. But no one treats my mother like dirt while I am alive and breathing. A heavy, profound silence returned to the massive room, but inside Felix's heart, a meticulous, multi-layered plan had already begun to take shape. Later that identical evening, Felix sat entirely alone in the dim light of his quiet home office. The rain continued to pour outside, creating a steady, rhythmic background noise as he tightly gripped his smartphone, his mind completely consumed by the thought of Lucy. He couldn't understand why a total stranger's act of kindness was affecting him so deeply, but he knew he needed to know the absolute truth about her character. After a long, deliberate pause, he dialed a private number, routing the call directly to his personal chief of security, Emeka, who was currently off duty. The line connected after just 2 rings, and Felix spoke in a calm, flat but incredibly firm voice that commanded immediate obedience. Emicha, I require your specialized assistance tonight. I need you to initiate a discreet, completely thorough background investigation on a specific young girl. The gruff, highly trained voice on the other end responded instantly. Yes, Mr. Badmus, I am ready. Who is the target, sir? Her name is Lucy, Felix answered, his eyes staring blankly at the wall. She currently works as a low-level floor attendant at our newly acquired flagship mall down the main avenue. She performed a massive act of kindness for my mother earlier today. I am texting you the very few descriptive details I currently possess. I want to know who she truly is when no one is watching her. Understood, sir, Emeka replied confidently. The moment the data hits my phone, I will deploy and begin the field surveillance immediately. Excellent, I trust your discretion, Emeka. Report back to me only when you have a complete file, Felix said, before abruptly ending the call and tossing the phone onto his desk. By the very next morning, Emeka, who was far more than just a regular guard, serving as Felix's most trusted, militarily trained operative, had arrived at the grand shopping mall. He didn't wear a uniform. Instead, he blended seamlessly into the bustling crowd, wearing plain clothes and dark sunglasses, positioning himself at a strategic distance outside the main glass doors where he could quietly observe everything. Through the clear glass, he watched Lucy as she began her shift. He saw her greeting wealthy, arrogant customers with that same radiant, unforced smile. He watched intently as she went completely out of her way to help a frail elderly man push an incredibly heavy shopping trolley across the slick floors. A few hours later, Emeka saw her pause her heavy sweeping duties entirely to kneel on the hard ground, just to gently tie the loose shoelaces of a crying little boy who had drifted away from his mother. Emeka moved closer, slipping into the staff break area during a shift change, and quietly struck up a casual conversation with a couple of Lucy's co-workers. "Does that girl, Lucy, always act so overly helpful, or is it just a show for the managers?" Emeka asked, testing the waters. One of the female attendants immediately shook her head, a soft look of admiration appearing on her face. "No, it's completely real. Lucy is hands down the kindest, most selfless person in this entire building. She never snaps, she never complains, and she always protects us." Another worker leaned in, lowering her voice significantly. "That poor girl has been through an absolute living hell over the past year, sir. But somehow she never lets the darkness change her sweet nature." When the evening clock finally signaled the end of the grueling shift, Emeka slipped out of the mall and followed Lucy from a very safe, professional distance as she began her long journey home. He watched her walk past the bright lights of the affluent districts, stepping deeper and deeper into the dark, neglected, and heavily flooded streets of a notorious Lagos slum. He watched as she navigated deep puddles, finally turning onto a quiet, narrow street and entering a crumbling, dilapidated compound. She unlocked a small, rusted iron door to a tiny, suffocating room located at the very back of the structure, disappearing inside for the night. For 2 more consecutive days, Emeka returned to the field, relentlessly executing his surveillance routine. He meticulously documented her daily life. She woke up in total darkness, walked miles to work to save transport money, labored tirelessly while radiating nothing but pure joy, helped every struggling soul she encountered, and returned entirely alone to her crumbling sanctuary without ever begging for a single kobo or complaining about her miserable fate. On the 4th morning, Emeka officially returned to the Badmas mansion, walking straight into Felix's private study. The young billionaire was standing by the window, his back turned. "Sir, the surveillance is complete. I have uncovered absolutely everything you need to know about the girl," Emeka announced, stepping forward. "Tell me everything, Emeka," Felix said, turning around slowly. Emeka handed over a thick cream-colored folder containing written reports, photographic evidence, and official records. "She is entirely clean, sir. No criminal history, no hidden motives, no bad company. She lost both of her parents exactly 1 year ago in a devastating road accident. She lives in deep poverty, struggling intensely to survive every single day, yet she completely refuses to beg or compromise her dignity. She is a genuinely rare, uncorrupted kind of human being, Mr. Badmus." Felix went completely silent for several intense seconds, his eyes locking onto the folder. "Thank you, Emeka. You have done an exceptional job. That is all I needed to hear. You are dismissed." Felix sat down heavily on the long executive couch, the detailed security report resting firmly in his trembling hands. He had already read through the pages over and over again, yet something about the cold, hard text kept holding his eyes captive, refusing to let him look away. "Lucy, a total orphan," he murmured softly to himself, his voice echoing in the empty room. He leaned his head back against the cushions and closed his eyes, feeling an overwhelming wave of emotion wash over him. "The room is far too quiet," he whispered, a profound sense of sorrow gripping his chest. "Why is my mother so deeply moved by this girl? Now I completely understand." He opened his eyes and looked once again at the official documents staring back at him. There it was, written in stark, painful bureaucratic text: "Father deceased. Mother deceased. No surviving siblings, no extended family support. Lives entirely alone in a high-risk slum. Works 6 days a week for a microscopic wage, zero record of minor infractions." Felix's heart grew incredibly heavy, a tight, suffocating knot forming in his throat as he gripped the papers tighter, nearly wrinkling the edges. She lost absolutely both parents in a single day. Her entire dream of becoming a medical doctor was violently ripped away, and yet she still stands at that mall entrance smiling like an angel at absolute strangers, he said, shaking his head slowly in sheer amazement and reverence. "How does a human being manage to stay so deeply kind and pure when life has dealt them nothing but tragedy and misery?" He stood up from the couch and walked over to the massive glass window, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. But his mind was far away, traversing the dark slums where Lucy lived. "I lost my father a year ago, and even with all my billions, all my power, and all my security, that loss almost completely broke my mind and soul," he said quietly to the empty room. "But this simple girl, She lost absolutely everything. She has nothing to her name, and yet she is stronger than me. He turned back to the table, dropping the paper report gently onto the polished wood, and sat down once more. For the very first time since this entire event had transpired, Felix wasn't thinking like a wealthy corporate boss. He wasn't even thinking as a protective son seeking vengeance for his mother. He was thinking like a man who had just gazed upon someone infinitely stronger, more resilient, and more honorable than anyone he had ever imagined meeting in his entire life. She didn't ask a single person for help, he whispered to himself, his face becoming intensely serious, his eyes burning with a sudden, unyielding determination. She gave away her own food and salary to help a stranger when she had absolutely nothing left to give. Who are you really, Lucy? Why do I feel this overwhelming, unstoppable need to know everything about you? Your trial is about to end, because I am coming to change your world. The following week, the oppressive atmosphere inside the mega shopping mall took a significantly darker, more toxic turn as the true colors of the antagonist were fully revealed to everyone. The vicious cashier whose name tag read Vanessa was not just a rude employee. She was a deeply malicious, power-tripping bully who took absolute delight in making life a living hell for anyone she considered beneath her social status. Following the incident with Mrs. Agnes, instead of feeling an ounce of remorse or shame for her disgusting behavior, Vanessa had grown incredibly arrogant and deeply resentful of Lucy's selfless intervention. She felt heavily insulted that a low-level, impoverished floor attendant had dared to step forward, speak down to her, and make her look bad in front of the affluent customers. Vanessa sat behind her modern, high-tech cash register, aggressively popping her pink bubble gum, her eyes scanning the floor like a hawk hunting for prey. The moment she spotted Lucy quietly wheeling a heavy cart loaded with restock items down the central aisle, an ugly, wicked smirk spread across her heavily painted face. She leaned over to another cashier, whispering in a loud, venomous tone that was intentionally meant to be overheard by the passing shoppers, "Look at that pathetic orphan girl, acting like she is some kind of a saint or a savior just because she gave away her tiny, miserable salary to buy oil for that filthy old beggar woman last week. She thinks she can use cheap public relations stunts to impress the branch manager and get a promotion, but she will always be nothing more than a ragged, penniless street rat scrubbing our dirty floors." The surrounding workers chuckled nervously, completely terrified of crossing Vanessa, who happened to be the niece of the mall's corrupt assistant general manager. Lucy heard every single word of the vile insult, the cruel words cutting deep into her already wounded heart, but she didn't stop moving. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the heavy metal cart, a wave of profound sadness washing over her. But she fiercely bit her lower lip, forced herself to swallow the rising lump of emotion in her throat, and remained absolutely true to her internal principles. She didn't bark back, she didn't cause a scene, and she didn't lower herself to Vanessa's toxic level. She simply looked down at her name tag, adjusted her worn orange uniform, and continued arranging the items with a quiet, dignified silence that only infuriated Vanessa even further. The absolute injustice of the situation was deeply suffocating, as the hardworking, grieving protagonist was being relentlessly tormented by a cruel, protected bully who believed she was entirely untouchable. As the days crawled by, the situation grew exponentially worse for Lucy, as Vanessa began orchestrating a deliberate, calculated campaign to get her fired and thrown back onto the dangerous streets of Lagos without a single kobo to her name. Vanessa began secretly making stealthy, unauthorized movements around the mall during the chaotic peak hours of the afternoon. When she knew the floor supervisors were entirely distracted by a massive influx of wealthy shoppers, Vanessa crept into Lucy's designated section. With an evil, triumphant smile on her face, she deliberately knocked over entire towering displays of expensive, imported glass perfume bottles, sending them crashing heavily onto the hard marble floor, shattering them into a million jagged pieces. The loud, explosive sound of breaking glass echoed violently through the building, immediately attracting the attention of the head security guards and the strict store managers. Before Lucy could even comprehend what had happened, Vanessa was already pointing her long, polished fingernail in her direction, putting on a fake, dramatic act of shock and horror. "Oh my goodness, Mr. Supervisor, look at what this incredibly clumsy, incompetent girl has done," Vanessa screamed out loudly, her voice filled with a sickening, theatrical malice. "I saw her with my very own eyes. She was completely distracted, playing with her phone instead of working, and she carelessly smashed these incredibly expensive luxury items. This is costing the company hundreds of thousands of naira in direct damages. She is a massive liability to this establishment and should be fired immediately without any reference. The head supervisor, an aggressive man who always favored Vanessa due to her family connections, marched over furiously, his face red with rage as he barked directly into Lucy's face, demanding that the cost of the broken glass be completely deducted from her next 3 months of pay, leaving her with absolutely zero money for food or her leaking slum rent. Lucy stood there in absolute shock, her eyes filling with burning tears as she looked around at the mocking faces of her antagonists. She knew with absolute certainty that she hadn't touched those bottles. She knew she was completely innocent, yet the crushing weight of systemic injustice was suffocating her. Vanessa stood in the background, crossing her arms, her head tilted back as she celebrated her wicked victory, completely convinced that she had successfully broken the spirit of the poor orphan girl. The viewers could feel a powerful, agonizing sense of unfairness, eagerly awaiting the moment when this toxic villain would finally be unmasked and brought to her knees. However, completely unknown to the arrogant Vanessa, a massive, silent storm was brewing directly above her head, and the gears of a powerful, uncompromising corporate machine had already been set into motion by the reclusive billionaire CEO himself. Felix Badmus was not a man who made empty promises, and he was absolutely not a man who allowed the mistreatment of the innocent to go unchecked under his watch. Inside his quiet, high-tech corporate office, he had spent the last 48 hours reviewing every single piece of data Emeka had brought to his desk. His heart burned with a fierce, protective instinct as he read about Lucy's daily struggles, and his anger had solidified into a cold, calculated strategy when he discovered the toxic work environment she was being forced to endure at the mall. Felix picked up his secure office phone and placed a direct, heavily encrypted call to the ultimate managing director of the entire retail division, a man who answered only to the billionaire family. "Listen to me very carefully," Felix said, his voice dropping into a dangerously calm, low tone that sent a shiver of terror down the director's spine. "I am launching an immediate, highly classified internal investigation into the management and staff behavior at our flagship mall location. I want a hidden, independent technical team to immediately tap into the main security server. They are to extract every single second of high-definition surveillance footage from the cash registers and the grocery aisles over the past 2 weeks. Do not inform the local branch managers, do not inform the supervisors, and under absolutely no circumstances is a single member of the floor staff to know that the corporate headquarters is watching them. I want to see everything they do when they think the world is blind." Within a matter of hours, a team of elite, specialized cybersecurity operatives had bypassed the local mall's systems, streaming a live, crystal clear feed of the entire supermarket floor directly onto the massive monitors inside Felix's private study. Felix sat in the dark, his hands folded beneath his chin, his sharp eyes intensely tracking the screens. He watched in real time as Lucy diligently worked until her hands were raw, and then his jaw tightened to the point of breaking as he witnessed the shocking, secret actions of Vanessa. He saw the exact moment Vanessa crept into Lucy's aisle, maliciously pushed the expensive perfume bottles to the floor, and then dramatically fabricated the lie to get her in trouble. Felix's eyes flashed with a terrifying, unyielding wrath as he watched the villain celebrate her twisted victory. The tension was building to an absolute crescendo. The villain was completely celebrating, entirely unaware that the invisible hand of the most powerful billionaire in the city was already wrapping around her neck, preparing to deliver a shocking, devastating stroke of ultimate justice. While the corporate trap was being meticulously laid, Lucy's difficult shift finally came to an end on a dark, heavily overcast Friday evening. Her body was aching intensely from hours of hard labor, her feet felt like lead inside her cheap sneakers, and her soul was profoundly exhausted from enduring days of relentless psychological bullying from Vanessa and the corrupt supervisors. She walked slowly out of the grand glass doors of the mall, the cold night breeze blowing against her face as she began her long, familiar walk down the dimly lit avenue toward her flooded slum. The sky above was pitch black, thick with heavy rain clouds that threatened to unleash another severe tropical storm at any moment. As she reached a particularly quiet, desolate stretch of the road where the streetlights had long been broken, she suddenly heard the loud, unmistakable sound of a powerful engine accelerating behind her. Before she could even react, a massive, luxurious black luxury sedan with heavily tinted windows and gleaming chrome accents pulled up smoothly right beside her, its tires splashing a small puddle of water onto the curb. Lucy froze in fear, her heart leaping into her throat as she stepped back defensively against a concrete wall, her mind racing with thoughts of dangerous city kidnappers. The sleek, automatic window of the back seat rolled down with a soft mechanical hiss, revealing a warmly lit interior. To Lucy's absolute, utter bewilderment, the face that emerged from the shadows belonged to none other than the fragile, elderly woman she had saved at the counter the previous week, Mrs. Agnes Badmus. But she didn't look like a helpless, forgotten mother anymore. She was draped in an incredibly elegant premium silk wrapper, a beautiful gold necklace catching the light around her neck, and her eyes radiated an immense, aristocratic warmth. "Hello, my beautiful, sweet child," Mrs. Agnes said gently, her voice carrying a soft, regal melody that instantly melted away Lucy's panic. "Do you remember me?" Lucy stared in complete, open-mouthed astonishment for several seconds, her mind struggling to connect the plain, tearful woman in rubber slippers with the immensely wealthy-looking figure sitting inside the luxury vehicle. Oh my goodness, you are the sweet mother from the mall counter," Lucy stammered, her voice shaking with surprise. "The one who needed the cooking oil, Mrs. Agnes let out a remarkably kind, joyful laugh that instantly filled the dark, cold street with a sense of safety, and she reached over to open the heavy car door from the inside, stepping out smoothly onto the pavement. She was wearing incredibly shiny, expensive designer shoes, yet she didn't hesitate to step onto the cracked sidewalk to reach the poor girl. "Yes, my dear, my name is Agnes, and I have been actively searching for you for days. In fact, I am just returning from your mall location right now. The head office coordinator informed me that your grueling shift had officially ended for the day." Lucy looked completely and utterly confused, her hands gripping her small bag tightly against her chest. "Searching for me, Ma? Why would an elite lady like you be looking for a simple attendant like me?" Mrs. Agnes stepped closer, a deep look of profound respect and motherly affection settling onto her face. "Because you did something for me that no one else in this entire massive city had the heart to do, Lucy. You shielded me from absolute humiliation when I was entirely helpless and alone. I haven't been able to stop thinking about your incredible purity and your immense sacrifice." Lucy looked down at her worn sneakers, a deep, genuine shyness coloring her cheeks. "It was truly nothing big, Ma. I just couldn't sit back and watch another human being go home empty-handed and broken-hearted. I only did what was right." Mrs. Agnes smiled beautifully, her eyes sparkling as she wide opened the luxury car door fully, gesturing toward the plush, heated leather seats inside. "Please, my sweet child, come with me inside this vehicle. I would love nothing more than to have a proper quiet conversation with you, where the cold wind cannot reach us." Lucy took a small step back, her eyes wide with a natural caution. "Go with you inside that car, Ma? To where?" "Yes, just for a very short, peaceful while," Mrs. Agnes said, her eyes projecting an absolute, unshakable sense of security and motherly love. "I want to take you to my home so I can thank you properly and show you the immense gratitude you deserve. Please trust me, Lucy." Lucy looked to the left and to the right. The street was completely dark, empty, and dangerous, but when she looked back into Agnes's eyes, she saw absolutely nothing but safety, honesty, and a profound, pure kindness that she hadn't felt since the tragic day her own mother passed away. After a short, hesitant pause, Lucy nodded her head slowly, whispering, "Okay, Ma, I trust you." She stepped carefully into the magnificent vehicle, the heavy door closing behind her with a solid, expensive thud as the luxury sedan silently glided away into the dark Lagos night, carrying the unsuspecting orphan girl toward a destiny so massively shocking and profoundly grand that her brilliant mind could not even begin to fathom it. The luxury vehicle glided smoothly through the towering iron gates of a sprawling, heavily guarded billionaire estate in the most exclusive neighborhood of Lagos, stopping directly in front of a breathtaking, white marble mansion that looked like a literal palace. Lucy stepped out of the car, her jaw dropping as her wide eyes took in the magnificent architecture, the brilliant crystal chandeliers glowing through the massive glass windows, and the immaculate fountain spraying water into the air. Mrs. Agnes smiled warmly, wrapping a protective arm around the trembling girl as she led her through the grand mahogany front doors into an expansive living room that completely took Lucy's breath away. The floors were made of shimmering, polished stone. The sofas were draped in rich, expensive fabrics, and a sweet, calming fragrance filled the entire space. As they sat down together on a plush sofa, Mrs. Agnes looked at Lucy with eyes full of a deep emotional truth, revealing that she had only gone to the mall that fateful day to cook a special meal because their regular chef was away on annual leave, and in her total rush, she had mistakenly forgotten her debit card, leaving her entirely vulnerable to the vicious insults of the cashier. "You didn't ask a single question, Lucy. You just stepped forward and saved my dignity by sacrificing your own hard-working salary. And that pure act of kindness completely captured my heart, Mrs. Agnes said softly, tears of gratitude swelling in her wise eyes as she reached for a small side table and picked up a heavy brown envelope stuffed with a massive bundle of high-denominator cash, alongside an exquisitely crafted velvet box containing a stunning, gleaming solid gold chain and matching bracelet that had belonged to her since her youthful days. Lucy's heart pounded violently against her ribs as she looked at the immense wealth being offered to her, but without a single second of hesitation, she gently yet firmly pushed the money and the priceless jewelry back toward the elderly matriarch, her voice cracking with absolute sincerity as she explained that she had helped simply because it was the right thing to do, not because she desired a reward, and that having known bitter hardship herself, she could never stand by and watch another mother suffer under public humiliation, just as Mrs. Agnes sat back in absolute, stunned reverence of Lucy's incredible integrity. The heavy double doors of the mansion's private study opened slowly, and Felix Badmus stepped into the radiant light of the living room, his tall, commanding figure draped in an impeccably tailored dark corporate suit. The moment Lucy looked up and saw his face, her entire body froze in complete overwhelming shock. Her hands began to tremble, and her mouth fell slightly open as she instantly recognized him from the countless national newspapers, television broadcasts, and business magazines she had studied while dreaming of her future. This was the legendary, elusive young billionaire CEO known throughout the entire country for his massive commercial empire and fiercely quiet lifestyle. Felix walked closer, his sharp, brilliant eyes locked onto Lucy with a profound, unreadable intensity, having witnessed her entire humble refusal of the riches through the cracked door, and he smiled softly, asking her with a gentle yet powerful voice why she would so easily reject a fortune that could instantly pull her out of the slums. Lucy took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders in her worn orange uniform, and looked the powerful billionaire directly in the eyes, stating with absolute, unshakable calm that kindness loses its value the moment it is paid for, and that she believed completely in the dignity of hard work, wanting to earn her future with the strength of her own hands so that she could look back and be truly proud of whatever life she built. No. A powerful emotional silence enveloped the grand room as Felix stared at her, his heart swelling with a profound respect and a sudden, fierce realization that before him stood the most incredible, resilient woman he had ever encountered. He leaned forward, his voice filled with an absolute, unyielding authority as he stated that if it was honest work she desired, he was offering her an immediate, high-paying position as his primary personal assistant at the global headquarters of Badmas and Company, a role that would come with a fully furnished luxury staff apartment and an extraordinary salary that would change her life instantly. Lucy's heart leaped into her throat, a wave of intense joy washing over her, but just as quickly her face fell into a look of deep sorrow as she looked down at her hands, whispering in a broken voice that she could never accept such a grand position because she had been forced to drop out of the university when her parents died, meaning she possessed absolutely none of the high corporate degrees or formal papers required for such an elite job. Felix smiled with an immense, breathtaking kindness, stepping closer as he told her that her extraordinary character was worth far more than any paper degree, promising that the company would place her through a specialized, fully paid executive training program while simultaneously enrolling her into a top-tier online university, paying every single kobo of her tuition so she could complete her medical management degree from the comfort of her new home at her own pace. Tears of absolute, overwhelming joy finally spilled over Lucy's cheeks as she nodded rapidly, entirely unable to believe that her darkest trial had just transformed into her greatest triumph. The very next Monday morning, the gears of ultimate karma and shocking exposure were set to grind the wicked antagonists into absolute dust. Inside the busy shopping mall, the malicious cashier Vanessa and her corrupt accomplice, the assistant general manager, were standing near the main offices, laughing loudly as they counted their daily receipts, entirely convinced that they were the absolute rulers of the establishment and that Lucy was likely weeping in her leaking slum room over the false damages they had pinned on her. Suddenly, the heavy glass entrance doors of the mall were violently pushed open, and an elite squadron of towering, dark-suited corporate security operatives marched into the building in perfect military precision, instantly clearing a wide path through the stunned crowd of shoppers and employees. Behind them stepped Felix Badmus himself, his expression carved out of solid, terrifying ice, flanked by the ultimate global managing director of the retail division, who was holding a thick, leather-bound legal file. Vanessa's arrogant laugh died instantly in her throat as she saw the sheer terror painted on her uncle's face. The assistant general manager's skin turned completely pale, his knees shaking violently as he recognized the reclusive billionaire owner of the entire conglomerate stepping onto the floor. Felix did not say a word. He simply gestured to the massive digital advertising screens towering over the mall center, and with a single command from the tech team, the screens suddenly flashed to life, broadcasting a crystal clear, high-definition recording of the mall's security footage directly to the entire public. A collective gasp of absolute horror and disgust rippled through the hundreds of gathered shoppers as the video clearly showed the exact moment Vanessa had crept down the aisle, maliciously smashed the expensive glass perfume bottles with her own hands, and then fabricated the disgusting lie to frame Lucy. The video then transitioned to show the footage from the previous week exposing Vanessa's vile, screaming verbal abuse against the fragile Mrs. Agnes Badmus. The exposure was absolute, devastating, and entirely inescapable. Vanessa's face twisted into a mask of pure unadulterated panic as she realized that her entire wicked, power-tripping existence had just been stripped naked before the entire world. She dropped to her knees on the hard marble floor, her manicured hands shaking uncontrollably as she began to weep hysterically, desperately crawling toward Felix's expensive leather shoes, begging for mercy, pleading that she had only been joking and that she would do anything to keep her job and avoid jail. Her corrupt uncle, the assistant general manager, began sweating profusely, stuttering over his words as he tried to lie and justify the corruption, claiming he had no knowledge of his niece's wicked actions. But the global managing director stepped forward, his voice ringing like a thunderclap through the silent mall, as he announced that by the direct executive order of the CEO, the assistant general manager was being summarily terminated from the global conglomerate effective immediately, his corporate license permanently revoked, and an exhaustive forensic audit launched into his entire financial history to recover every single kobo he had ever stolen through internal corruption. Felix then looked down at the hysterical, weeping Vanessa with an expression of cold, unyielding disgust, stating that she was not only fired without a single kobo of severance, but that the company's elite legal team had already filed official criminal charges against her for malicious property damage, corporate fraud, and public defamation, and that the police transport vehicles were already waiting outside the glass doors to carry her directly to a maximum security prison cell. The crowd of shoppers and honest mall workers instantly erupted into a massive, deafening roar of applause and cheers, celebrating the complete, undeniable triumph of absolute justice as the sobbing, completely humiliated villain was aggressively handcuffed by uniformed officers and dragged away through the very dirt she had forced others to walk on, her power entirely shattered and her arrogance permanently crushed. As the dust firmly settled on the dramatic downfall of her enemies, Lucy's life completely transformed into a beautiful, breathtaking masterpiece of destiny and divine compensation. She officially moved out of the leaking, rat-infested slum room forever, stepping into a gorgeous, fully furnished luxury corporate apartment located in a serene, high-end district of Lagos where the windows wrapped around to show a stunning view of the ocean. Every morning she no longer woke up in pitch darkness to walk miles in the blistering heat. Instead, she was driven smoothly in a company vehicle straight to the grand global headquarters of Badmas & Company. Wearing elegant, professional corporate attire that replaced her old orange uniform, she proved to be absolute perfection as Felix's primary personal assistant. Her sharp intellect, which had been buried under the weight of poverty for so long, shone brighter than ever as she meticulously managed massive corporate files, organized high-level international schedules, and handled wealthy investors with a natural grace and humility that earned the deep admiration of the entire executive board. Yet her incredible work ethic didn't stop at the office doors. Late into the night, sitting at her sleek new desk with her modern laptop open, she passionately pored over her online university courses, maintaining a flawless academic record as she aggressively pursued her degree. Felix watched her growth with an immense, swelling pride, completely captivated by her unshakable strength, while Mrs. Agnes watched from the mansion with a joyful, knowing smile, seeing her beloved son completely fall in love with a woman of pure, uncorrupted gold. Within a matter of months, the deep professional respect between Felix and Lucy blossomed into an unbreakable, deeply romantic bond, leading to a spectacular, heartwarming traditional engagement that filled the grand Badmus mansion with endless laughter, light, and the true smell of pure familial joy. In stark and brutal contrast, the heavy, unyielding iron hand of absolute karma completely crushed the malicious antagonists, ensuring they reaped the bitter, toxic seeds they had so carelessly sown. Vanessa, stripped entirely of her fake jewelry, her heavy makeup, and her loud, arrogant attitude, was sentenced to a lengthy term behind bars in a harsh, overcrowded correctional facility for corporate fraud and malicious defamation. The girl who once took sick delight in looking down on the poor was now forced to wear a rough prison uniform and spend her days scrubbing cold, dirty concrete floors under the strict watch of guards, feeling the exact same public humiliation she had inflicted on Mrs. Agnes and Lucy, but with absolutely no one stepping forward to show her an ounce of mercy. Her corrupt uncle, the former assistant general manager, fared no better. The exhaustive forensic audit launched by Felix's legal team completely exposed years of hidden financial theft, leading to the total seizure of all his ill-gotten houses, luxury cars, and bank accounts, throwing him into a state of absolute, irreversible poverty. He was blacklisted permanently from the entire corporate and retail industry, forced to wander the very streets of Lagos as a broke, forgotten man, serving as a living, breathing warning to anyone who believed that power and family connections could forever shield them from the consequences of cruelty and systemic injustice. This deeply emotional and shocking story teaches us an eternal, unshakable philosophical lesson that every single viewer watching this video must carry in their heart forever. Karma is an absolute, inescapable reality that never loses its address. Life may test your resolve, push you into the darkest corners of poverty, and allow arrogant, malicious bullies to celebrate a temporary victory over your innocence. But your character in the midst of the storm is what ultimately dictates your destiny. Kindness is a silent, sacred currency. It is a seed that you plant in the universe without expecting anything back, and when you least expect it, that seed will grow into an overwhelming forest of divine blessings that no human being can ever cut down. True strength does not come from the wealth in your bank account or the loudness of your pride. It comes from staying profoundly humble, working tirelessly with your own hands, and remaining fiercely true to your internal principles, even when the world gives you every reason to be cruel. What do you think about this touching, incredible story of Lucy's triumph over injustice and the powerful hand of fate that changed her world? Please share your deepest thoughts, reflections, and life experiences in the comment section below, as I would truly love to read and interact with every single one of you. Also, if your heart was deeply moved and inspired by this video, please hit that like button, share it with your family and friends to spread the message of kindness. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on your notification bell so you will be the absolute first to know the exact moment our next shocking life story drops. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your incredible support always, and I will see you firmly in the next story.